So I know there were some questions early on about the CLI. The CLI is dead, it's dying, it just has taken 30 years to do it, it's still kicking.
Yeah, take it out of my cold dead head.
I think I like to think about that whole conversation in two parts. There's the experience of using the CLI, and I don't know how many of you are old Unix and Linux guy, the old ed editor. You edited one line of text at a go, and you were kind of blind to the rest of the file. That's the CLI experience, right? You get one line, you say no, you say yes, you add something. It's from literally the 70s. That's the experience in the CLI. And then I think about that experience and how terrible and old it is. And then I think about it's a really nice, concise way of describing what I want the device to do. All right? Everyone can look at a configuration file and know what the device is doing, what it's running, how it's operating. So there's a description of what you want it to do, which is convenient, and then there's the actual act of interacting with that CLI, which I think is terrible. And so there's a little bit of a paradox there.
So in fairness, I don't think any of our conversation was saying that or doubting that the CLI is a bit of an antiquated way. And my question was around complexity.
Right.
So we're saying we're making the operation simpler, but we're not actually removing any of the complexity of what we're trying to solve for. And so my question around that is, how do you balance those two things? It's not about whether it's CLI or if it's GUI or whether it's API or whatever. Like, because that's at this point.
All right.
I think it's a bit of
Let's
trivia.
do this.
It really comes down to how are you going to manage the device? Is it going to be centralized, decentralized? Those are all questions that need to be solved. But it's less important because I guess my thing is I keep hearing it's going to get simpler. It's going to get simpler. It's going to get simpler. And I keep calling BS on that over and over and over again because we haven't reduced any of the complexity that we're trying to solve in the network. We're just managing it a different way. And so what I'm asking is what has changed that's going to make it easier to manage solving every problem in every technical stack that is any problem in the infrastructure, because that's ultimately where it seems to always end up, as we're solving problems not just for connectivity, but for security and for resiliency and for all these other things. The network is complex not because we use CLI. The network is complex because we solve lots of problems in the network.
Yeah, I mean,
and it's very hard to make that simpler.
Yeah, I mean, we've also got two competing trends, right? We are bringing more tools to bear, but we also have increasing complexity, right? You're asked to move at higher speed with less resources, and it's just adding more complexity to the network, right? More flexibility. We've got overlays everywhere. 10 years ago, there wasn't that many overlays. So there are two competing trends, right? We are adding complexity and hopefully adding tools to address it, but at best, we're probably keeping flat.
Make it easier as we add even more complexity, so that ultimately we end up in the same spot we've always been. That sounds about right.
There's kind of two pieces we've got here. I don't have a mobile app demo. We can maybe follow up with something on that. But we do have a mobile app for Android and Apple that uses Bluetooth to talk to the switches, and you can use that to basically get it up and on the network, that initial install. It also helps with the stacking of the new access boxes, if you want to stack those in kind of a front plane mode. It's really geared more towards technicians. You can enable a technician to go out and stack up the switch without having a lot of need to touch the box. But that also integrates with NetEdit. And everybody keeps talking about this, and I really want to dive into the demo because I think that makes it a lot more concrete. But what we were trying to do with NetEdit is really solve that problem of how do you take the experience of a network engineer and augment them so that they can do more, right? And there is a trend, and it's obviously a real trend, around automation, programming. There's a lot of value there, and we're not fighting that trend so much as trying to bring that more to the campus. And you can get some of the programming and automation in the campus, but it's a little bit of a different beast. There's always some funky IoT device, or some professor at a university refuses to give up his printer from the 80s, and you've always got to make slight adjustments. How do you automate that? How do you keep track of it? What's that entire change management solution? And that's where NetEdit starts to come in and play. And so we've trying to take modern tools and apply it to this configuration management, as well as bring in some of the network monitoring. Scott was mentioning NAE agents, how we bring that in and give you a more holistic view of the network and its health. Let's switch over.
Can I ask kind of a weird question?
Yep.
The CX mobile app.
Yeah.
Everybody seems to be producing those. Is that just an ego thing, or are they actually getting used?
It's getting used.
Yeah.
One of the TMEs, I was talking to him last week. He was stacking some switches, and he's like, "I'm never going to do it manually again." He's like, "It was like magic."
Yeah.
It really does make it nice. We use some BLE to discover the switches, and then they just pop up in the app.
Over an IP, you're actually using BLE when you're local to the switch.
Yeah.
Walk around with a tablet.
Yeah.
And you're configuring the switch.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe it's not just eye candy and a fun marketing exercise.
No, it's pretty nice.
Yeah.
I use it now instead of to get a switch up and running.
Okay.
And managed. So there's a lot of different things in NetEdit, and we obviously don't have time to touch them all. I'm going to try to give you kind of the flavor and how it works, the functionality that's there, and what we're building on with it. This is kind of a dashboard. The underpinnings of NetEdit is really the database again. We keep talking about databases. NetEdit is an OVA. It runs on VMware, and it is there to reach out, take in switch configs, throw it in the database, take in some neighbor information, put this all in a database so that you can search through and run queries on all that information at once. So each one of these tiles that are here is just a query that I've run on the database and then represent the results. So if you're worried about your core switches changing, you can create a query for that. If you're worried about anything to do with config and some neighbors, you can put that in for queries. Where we get to automation with this is if you want to start, changing a bunch of switches at once, there's a few different ways to do it, right? There's automation, but there's also what we're doing here. Let me see if I can. I'm going to break OSPF. So what we have here is our configuration editor, right? So this is CX CLI for 3 8320s at once. We kind of stack them up on top of each other. This is a single switch configuration, and we've taken the file out of the CX platform, put it in this editor, and now you've got the ability to see the entire thing and edit it like a file, right? This gets a little bit away from that 1970s ed experience and gets you to a little bit more of a modern experience. But what we've also done is layer them on top of each other. So as I add another switch config, anywhere where they are similar, it just stays the same. When you start to see differences between those configs, you see some blue lines, especially down there at the bottom. You see the host name. We realize that that's a parameter, so we go ahead and parameterize that for you automatically. Same with like the router IDs. And so what this gives you is if you have a bunch of switches that you want to make a similar change on, you can throw them all into the editor. Any inconsistencies amongst those switches pops out. You can see it pretty clearly. It helps you keep the ACLs, the configurations, the passwords. You can keep them consistent across those devices. We also have a lot of validation that we've built into NetEdit. When you get to automating, the kind of the hidden truth that I think people are really starting to realize in the last couple of years is how do you validate what you're automating, right? You can automate stuff, you can make it repeatable, but things change, you want to tweak it, how do you know it's still working? And what we've done is we've put a lot of validation rules around this editor experience and around NetEdit. So certainly if I mistype something, that's going to tell me that's not a command. You can't really do that. But we tried to keep some of the nice things with the CLI, like tab complete and question marks. So I can just do the certified algorithms. And you notice that, maybe I should maybe I'll tell you what that was first. So we have some conformance failures. Basically, you can create rules of things, business standards that you want your configuration to follow. So maybe you want all the devices to use this DNS server or this radius server, or if you've got OSPF configured on an interface, you must always use authentication. And you can build those rules and have them run across all the configs. Because we're using REST and database, whenever there's a change on the switch, NetEdit will reach out and pull that new config in and run these same queries across it for conformance. So if someone outside of NetEdit goes in and changes the radius server, you can still get a notification and pop up. But here in the editor, it's letting me know you need to have certified algorithms to be conformant. So go ahead and put that one in.
So you're doing a whole bunch of compliance checks. Inside of the tool, you're saying this is the compliance of certain variables.
Yep.
These have to be configured, and if they vary,
You can raise an alert. You can
raise an alert, that sort of stuff, yeah. So people shouldn't change the SNMP, or if the SNMP is not what it's supposed to be, it should alert.
Yeah, exactly.
What if I don't want to use this and I want to use Ansible, something to force a particular state into my configs?
Yeah, so what we did with NetEdit is we take the network as the source of truth. And so when we see a change on the device, we pull it back in, represent it in the tool, and run all the queries against it. At the moment, we don't push and have this be the source of truth, right? It's a little bit more flexible, I think.
You're saying this is just another option. It doesn't
You
preclude...
can mess with it with Ansible all you want, and it'll just show up here and say, someone de-changed stuff.
Yeah.
This date, this time.
But you're giving me this as another option if
Yeah.
I'm a AOS-CX user.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I'm going to go ahead and break OSPF on just one of the switches. Leaf 1. If you're playing around with your MTU sizes, trying to get a little bit more out of your network, and you don't match them across links, OSPF will not play well. So I've taken one of the links up the MTU, and that will cause a mismatch, and OSPF won't form an adjacency. So I've made a bunch of changes here. These are not live. They're currently in the tool. I can go back, and when I hit deploy, the first thing we're going to do is we bundle up the configuration changes I've made. We talk to the switch and say, hey, make a copy of your running database, then erase it, and we're going to stick this new config in that copy. It's not live. It's just using the switch to validate the config we're going to push, right? So we're actually validating it on the hardware that's going to get it. So if that hardware didn't support a protocol and we were trying to enable it, we would find out before we pushed the config, right? So right here, device validation 3 passed. The other thing we do before we make the change is we do a change validation. Let me show you the results from that. What this does is, so just a short aside, I worked at a triple play provider many years ago, and we had 15-minute change windows, and that was, you were just moving as fast as you could, copy and pasting, comparing things, because you had to, if you had to back it out, you had about 5 or 6 minutes to decide whether it was good or not. And so that was kind of the inspiration for this. We've gone ahead, I should have broken OSPF, so we can see that here, that we went from a full adjacency to EX start. What we do is we go and we issue a bunch of show commands, then we push the config changes, and we issue those same show commands and do a simple diff for you. So this just automates a lot of that process of deciding, did the change I push into the network have the impact that I wanted? Okay, and this is just another layer of validation. If you're happy with the change results, if you can keep them. If you're not happy, you just hit the rollback button, and we'll take those changes out of the network and put it back. At the moment, we've tested roughly 500 switches at a go using this editor and this change flow. We're scaling up as we move forward. Some of the other nice things we've got, so there's certainly a topology view. We also have these layers, is what we're calling them on the left, different layers of the network that we can turn on and off. The green N is kind of normal. That represents the NAE status of the devices. So if one of the NAE agents goes bad, that'll show up here. Again, we're just subscribing to the state of the NAE agent here. We're not pulling all the data. So we get a REST notification, we can trigger it, and then from there you can drill down into the data on the switch. It's also possible to pull the data off if you want to put it in a repo, but we don't have that in the tool. So this gives you a broad view of the health of the network. We do a bunch of consistency checks. You can see that bridging here has got a little bit of a red mark. What that is we've done consistency checks for various parts of the config. So if I turn on a VLAN consistency check, that's telling me there's an error on this link. So this link, well, I can go over here and there's a few ways to get there, but this is telling me VLAN 195 has a problem. If I check on this link, that's telling me that one side of that link has VLAN 195, the other doesn't have it configured. So there's an inconsistency in the VLAN pairing across the link. Right? And if I wanted to see, let's say, where VLAN 195 actually is, we go through, that's where it's configured on all the links. If we zoom in here, you can see that it's only on half of the link. It's only configured on the top half. So because we have this REST database, because we have this capability to grab data, we're actually subscribing to about 500, 600 different database entries from every device. Whenever there's a change, it gets fed up to NetEdit pretty much instantaneously and gets reflected in this topology view. It allows us to run these comparisons. Do you have the right VLANs? Do you have the right lag membership? Right? Sometimes you've got 3 there, 2 there. There's mismatches. So we're able to build up a lot of checks there. Yeah.
NetEdit sitting running on an appliance somewhere, a VM or something?
Yep, it's an OVA. We can also turn these layers off. These layers kind of drive the topology view and allow you to drill down. So we can turn off even the NAE status to check just if you have a routing problem, tell me which specific switches have routing, then you can drill down in there. Again, the search criteria we have, we can do something like, all the switches running VXLAN, and they're selected. But I can make this a more complicated query, NBGP, and, well, I guess those are VXLAN. Let's do OR BGP, oops, BGP. All right, but maybe I want to know EVPN, right? And so, did I spell that right? And so what you get is the ability to query the database of the configurations running and quickly get to the ones that you want to make a change to, right? We can also tag the devices. So you can do like right now the only tags I have is kind of a role, but there's all my access switches. Now I can go make changes to those. And this search underlies a lot of the capabilities inside NetEdit. So a lot of those tests, those conformance tests we were talking about, you can have those applied by any of these search criteria. So if you want a conformance test only for things that are running EVPN, you can make it and have it search the configs and only apply those tests to those devices.
What are the keywords I'm actually searching against? Is it like a taxonomy that NAE knows about, or is it configuration?
It defaults to the config, but there's a long list of capabilities. So we can do like, let's see, running config modified. Like there's a lot of different things. So I can say, show me everything that's changed in the last day, right? And this, I think they've probably all changed in the last day. I've been mucking about with it, right? And so you can quickly see, I had a problem with this in the last day, which ones, where's my search criteria, right? Which devices have changed in the last day? In 10 seconds, I know those devices.
Is this a SaaS offering? Or is this,
Sorry?
Is NetEdit a SaaS offering, or do we install it somewhere? Or?
Yeah, it's an OVA, so you just have to install it on the server.
And it's a freebie. I license it as an extra thing.
There's a 25 node file state. It's kind of kick the tires, see if you like it.
Yeah.
And then there's a subscription model.
Got it.
To get it. But yeah, it's on-prem in your server. Another thing that we've added just to help make some tasks a little bit easier. Let's see if who's got NTP configured? No one does. So we can go through and, I don't know, let's just select a group of switches. We have a lot of stuff here on the, what we're calling solution deployments. Right now we've got, DNS, radius setup, some segmentation, and NTP. So what this does is you can create these files. It's all data-driven. So you create a description of these parameters and then the config that you'd like to copy and paste in, essentially. And then you can fill these out and we can put them together. So I can create these wizards for whatever task I want. And it'll go and we can run it across all the different switches. There's a lot of flexibility here. We're reusing some of Apache models for how they deal with their configuration. Makes it a pretty powerful solution. One of the unique ones we've done is we've added what we call just an add remove. And so I can go through and say, take out all the certified take out all of that. So I can go ahead and check. I think I put it in where did I put it? I thought I put it on one of these switches. Oh, I never deployed it. Okay. I think I did a rollback, and so we pulled this out. But I could take out like SSH server VRF management, right? And so what that does is that goes through, if I can spell it correctly. So you can remove or you can add config lines. Like if I wanted to add a new VLAN 200, oh, I think I already have 200. Let's do 1,000, 2,000. And so what this goes through is you can go through, you can preview them. You can see the extra configurations that get added. Make sure you're comfortable with the automation of putting this in. And then you can go ahead create. When we do it this way, we go through and we do, again, the same validation techniques we did through the CLI, through the editor. We generate the configs. Right now I'm failing conformance. That's probably that SSH certified algorithms because I don't have that in. That's a warning. You don't have to have it block. And then again, that last step is we sent this new configuration out to the device, made sure it fit, and now we're ready to deploy. So you can go ahead and deploy it. And again, this is very similar to the editor in terms of the workflow, but you don't ever have to go through the editor. You can base it off the wizards. And if at any point you want to go back and, right now I'm deploying to all 5 at once, I don't have a lot of control over that. If you go back to the plan view, the one we saw the first time, you can select which ones you want to deploy it to. So you can deploy it to one, see if it's good, and then go back and deploy it to the rest. Go ahead and commit that change. So what we've tried to do here is put a lot of capabilities around change control to automate it, and automate it in the sense of making a human more powerful, right? So instead of me trying to make a change across 50 switches blindly, I can make that change. It's still me making the change, it's still a human. It's not pulling the human out of the loop. It's enabling that human to be more powerful and cover more space and more complexity. Certainly we keep track of all the changes we make. We can dive into any one of the switches and we get a complete listing of all the changes made, who made it, what it was, firmware updates, hardware changes, all of them get listed here, which is really important if you want to roll the config back to what it was last week. You can go down here and just, I want to roll it back to this configuration point. It's important to see the firmware updates and hardware changes in that line, so you know if you're going to jump back across one of those boundaries, your configuration may vary, right? You might have new interfaces, different interfaces, or just different firmware capabilities. So this gives you a lot of audit capability as well as the ability to understand what that rollback and the impact that would have on the device. I think that's all the bells and whistles I wanted to cover today. There's a lot more to see in here, but that's the general concept: managing configuration, trying to get that whole workflow so that you can do those change windows quickly without having a lot of downtime, and making that network admin more powerful.
Now, this tool is unique to the Aruba environment. I couldn't run this against something with a Yang model or something.
Yeah. So at the moment, it's all CX.
Yeah.
Yeah.